There was a late development this afternoon, a very important and serious one, on day 2 of Donald Trump's $250 million civil fraud lawsuit in the state of New York. When court resumed after a break this afternoon, Trump was there again. He was angrily admonished by the judge, Judge Arthur Engoron. He was scolded for posts that he made on social media today. Well, we believe this is, if not the first, then a rarity. Those posts are gone. They have been deleted, apparently, after the judge said he ordered them taken down. So what did they say? What did Trump share and then email to his millions and millions of followers? Why, it was an attack on the judge's clerk, featuring a link to her Instagram account and a photo of her next to Senator Chuck Schumer. The judge stated plainly that personal attacks on his staff are unacceptable and suggested violations would be met with swift and meaningful sanctions. Quote, consider this a gag order on all parties with respect to posting or publicly speaking about any member of my staff, end quote. It is the latest edition of Trump's longstanding woe is me, blow up all the norms routine, his phony sense of victimhood on which he built a political brand. He wants people to think everyone's out to get little old me, so he takes vicious, cheap shots even when they violate the law. In fact, Trump called it, quote, very unfair that this isn't a jury trial in New York. But as Judge Engoron noted, Trump's legal team never asked for a jury trial in New York. And even if they had, it is not clear that they would have gotten one based on the type of case Attorney General Tish James brought. Trump lawyer Alina Habba said in a statement that a jury trial, quote, was never an option, a case made harder to make, as our Deadline Legal blog notes, when you never ask for a jury trial. During another break today, Trump told reporters that he'd take the stand, quote, at the appropriate time. And so he may soon find himself in an environment uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous legally for him, where the facts matter and his perceived sense of being a victim does not. We would warn him to be careful what he wishes for. Joining us now from outside the courthouse, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. David Jolly still with us, and joining me at the table, senior editor for Bloomberg Opinion and MSNBC political analyst Tim O'Brien. Lisa, there was drama on the House floor, but there was in some ways bigger drama in that courthouse behind you today. Take us inside.
Well, Nicole, the examination today, or the court proceedings, really focused on a gentleman named Donald Bender. He is Donald Trump's former lead accountant at Mazars and was principally responsible for the issuance of these statements of financial condition that are at the heart of this case. But as you noted, the bigger drama was not in the Trump team's effort to discredit Donald Bender and make it seem as if it was folly for him to rely on the Trump team for information. Rather, they should have been able to rely on him as a certified public accountant. The real drama was in what happened outside the courtroom, because Trump, during a break, must have posted the social media post you were talking about earlier that then became the subject matter of the gag order. And hell hath no fury, Nicole, like a judge whose staff is messed with. I can tell you that from personal experience as a former law clerk. Judge Engoron, who normally has a Larry David-like demeanor, was suffering no fools when he talked about the fact that no one should be allowed to talk about his staff in social media posts and emails, or just speaking publicly without suffering severe consequences. He was unambiguous about that, Nicole.
I mean, Tim, Trump has attacked DOJ, IRS, FBI, Judge Chutkan, Fani Willis, the jurors. I mean, it never stops. This is an aggressive response to something he does as easily and readily as the rest of us sort of wake up and reach for coffee.
A long overdue response. You know, I think looking at this is, it's just another example of how utterly thuggish, obscene, and dangerous this buffoon can be when he's left to his own devices. And he's been doing it for years. Judge Curiel in the Trump University case, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss in the Georgia voter fraud case. He shifts between people who can defend themselves and have the resources to, journalists like you and me, to average people who are innocent bystanders, because at the end of the day, he's a bully. And he doesn't really care about the consequences of his own actions. And I think, you know, we're used to Donald Trump being obscene and being a thug and being dangerous, but we shouldn't accommodate his thuggishness or his obscenities, because doing that is dangerous. And I think one of the things you're seeing now is repeated challenges of institutions and the rule of law and the court system is people saying, well, you know, he's a former president. It would be wrong to put him in jail if he violates his gag order. This has come up in the January 6th case with Judge Chutkan. She has repeatedly told him that he's trying to, you know, his public statements intimidate witnesses. They could taint the jury pool. They will pervert the legal process. And I think at the end of the day, you can only warn a defendant so many times, and then you have to take action. And you either gag him, as he was done today, or you ultimately may have to put him in jail. And I think the real test with Donald Trump is that he has to observe the same standards as everyone else, not in spite of being an ex-president, but because he's an ex-president.
What does it say to you that he hurriedly took it down?
Well, part of it is just his sort of belief, like the way that, like, children, when they're corrected by their parents, they close their eyes and they pretend like it didn't happen. I didn't see it. It didn't happen. So there's part of just the inner 7-year-old of Donald Trump. The other part is he recognized right away that he was caught out being a bully. And then I think a third element is that it already had done his work. Once he puts it up, his tens of millions of followers on social are going to disseminate it. So he can sort of make up the excuse publicly, well, I had second thoughts and I took it down. You know, I think, you know, what's so extraordinary about this one, again, is she's a court clerk. She is relatively powerless. And we're in an era where people will come to people's homes. People will take action against anyone Donald Trump identifies as a threat to him. And he knows it. So the fact that he went ahead and did it, I think, says something very deep about who he is. And I think institutions have to rise to this moment and check him every second of the way with as much discipline and severity as possible, because we're heading down a very bad path right now in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, if I could get back every time I said the rule of law is under attack. David Jolly, he names names. He doesn't ever attack the rule of law. Yeah. His posts don't say rule of law and a picture of the rule of law next to a Democrat or in front of a baseball bat. He names names. And we choose not to amplify them here. It's the right thing to do. But to Tim's point, they don't need help amplifying them. And Donald Trump never apologizes when and if violence is the natural extension of the conspiracy theories he peddled. He didn't apologize for the person who believed the conspiracy theories he repeated over and over again and broke into Speaker Pelosi's house and hurt her husband with a hammer. He doesn't apologize when the shooter in New Mexico went out and shot up the homes of election workers. Didn't apologize for repeating the big lie. In fact, he repeats it. What do we do? What do the rest? It feels like Trump's behavior is now such an established pattern. We know what he's going to do. What do the rest of us do? It seems Judge Engoron gave us a good example.
That's right, Nicole. Either out of vanity or political strategy or both, one of the tools that Donald Trump reaches for is to incite violence. There's no greater example than January 6th. But we also know, as you've mentioned, the lone wolf, where he identifies a specific individual or a specific target, and then his audience, whether it's been amplified or by media or not, his audience receives that message and goes to action. And I think there are two things to address. First, Donald Trump as a defendant or as someone in a civil proceeding needs to be sanctioned, and he needs to suffer the same accountability under the law that anybody else would. Politically, he needs to be defeated. He needs to be crushed. His movement needs to be crushed politically at the ballot box, because that's what it's going to take. And I think the way to do that politically in America, in a two-party system, our politics is informed by the contrast. And John Harwood pointed out today, you have Donald Trump, the leading candidate for the White House on the Republican side, being sanctioned by a court, about to be found liable for at least $250 million. You have Kevin McCarthy losing the speakership, Republicans in chaos, and you have Joe Biden negotiating prescription drugs for seniors in the Medicare program. That contrast is how Donald Trump ultimately suffers political accountability and loses his power, if you will. Now, what has he created culturally? That's a deeper question for us to examine and study.
And you know we will do that with your help. Lisa, I want to come back to you. Donald Trump started with this crushing blow. The judge had already decided, had already ruled on, in summary judgment, the question of fraud. So what is still at stake, and what happened today on the legal front?
So, Nicole, let's take your first question first. There are 6 more claims to decide. And although Judge Arthur Engoron already decided that Trump and his organization and the other defendants engaged in persisted and repeated fraud, intent is not a portion of the statute for which he's already been found liable. The remaining violations are essentially that he has committed repeated and persistent fraud and illegality by violating sections of New York's criminal law having to do with false financial statements, falsifying business records, and committing insurance fraud. And if you're the Attorney General, the reason you want to prove these in a court of law is because you want the full smorgasbord of relief that you've asked for in your complaint. You want to bar Donald Trump from doing business in the state of New York, whether it's by borrowing money from New York lenders or whether serving as an officer or director of a New York company. You want all of that and a bag of chips, too. And that's why they're here at trial, Nicole.